Assalamu alaikum. I love you too. That was a very warm welcome. I appreciate that. I'm very excited to be here. I've actually heard about this event. I know that Linda Sarsour was here last year, and I love her, so I feel like she's a tough act to follow, and I will try my best. I'm Ibtihaj Muhammad. I am the first Muslim woman to represent Team USA at the Olympic Games. And So when most people think of an Olympic athlete, they generally don't think of someone who looks like me or someone who looks like you. And when people think of athletes in general, they don't think of people who look like us. And that's been part of my journey my entire life as an athlete, is kind of challenging these misconceptions that people have about who I am, not just as a woman, not just as an African American, but also as a Muslim. In my family, sport has always been a really large part of just our family dynamic. I'm African American, and sport is very centric to our household. I like to say that we weren't really given a choice in whether or not we played sports as kids. Our parents rather gave us the choice of what sport we could play. So I remember being really young and my mom putting our town recreation book in front of us. And we get to flip through the pages and pick different sports to try. And I tried so many different sports. I mean, I played softball, I tried tennis, I ran track. But for me, in each of those different sports, as a young Muslim girl, my mom in particular always had to change the uniform for me by adding long sleeves or adding, spandex. I spent a lot of time in models as a kid, trying to find, the perfect long sleeve top that matched, my track uniform. And it wasn't until I discovered fencing at the age of 12 that I realized how important the uniform was. I was driving past a local high school with my mom. I know, I feel like my dad is omitted from this story, but my mom was like a true soccer mom. We were driving past our local high school in our town. I grew up in Maplewood, New Jersey. Is there someone from Maplewood here? Yes, Jersey, I love that. There's two of us. I'm excited. Driving past my local high school, and I remember my mom telling me to look out, to look over there into the building, like, what are they doing? And there were a group of kids inside, and they had on these long white jackets, and they had on these long white pants, and they had on what we thought were helmets at the time. And my mom's like, I have no idea what they're doing, but they're covered, so you will try it. And when I got to high school that next year at 13, I went out for my high school fencing team. And I remember I'd played volleyball that fall with my friends, and I remember trying to convince my friends to come out to the fencing team with me. And them saying, absolutely not, right? Fencing, if anyone knows anything about fencing, it's very white, right? So to try to convince my friends who are also brown, to join not just the fencing team where we would be, the only minorities there, but also fencers, to say the least, they kind of looked a little dorky. So my friends were like, no, we're not doing this, right? And I remember being like, you know what? I'm going to go to a good college, right? You'll see in 4 years. I'm going to use this opportunity as a fencer to go to a good school. I'm from a large family. I'm one of 5 kids. And when you come from a working class family, both my parents are now retired. My mom's a teacher, and my dad is a retired drug detective. Shout out to the hijabi police officer over here. And not to forget Brooke, our other officer here. But when you come from a working class family and you have a lot of siblings, you have to be creative with how you plan to pay for college. And when I looked at the top 10 schools in the country, they all had fencing teams. So for me, it was very easy, very simple. I was like, oh, okay. I've been a planner since birth. I don't know if you guys can tell. But I'm like, I'm going to use fencing to go to a good school. That was my plan. And even though my friends weren't on board, right, they were not impressed with the makeup of the fencing team, I kind of found a love for my teammates. Even though we were all very different, I was one of the only African Americans on the team. I was the only Muslim on the team, the only one wearing hijab. I loved my team. And it so happens that my parents moved to a town that has, the strongest fencing program in the state. So year after year, we're winning these state titles, and I'm fencing. I'm fencing épée at the time. Quick history of fencing, there's 3 weapons: foil, épée, and saber. I started in épée. I fenced épée for about 2.5 years, and I was okay. I wasn't great. I was no LeBron. And my team, at the end of my junior year, needed a saber fencer. And I remember my coach pulling me to the side and saying, you're going to switch to saber. And I'm like, no, I'm not. My friends are in épée. I'm not switching. And he's like, no, you are. We actually need you to change. And I remember crying, right? Because there was this lack of comfort in changing weapons. There was this level of unknown. And I mean, I'm very thankful to this coach to this day. He's my very first coach. And him forcing me to change weapons is why I'm here today, because I was not going to be an Olympian as an épéist. But changing to saber, I became one of the best fencers in the state. And it's interesting because fencing not just allowed me to pursue my desires to be physically active as a young girl, but it also just uniquely accommodated the tenets of my faith as a Muslim woman. I didn't have to jeopardize who I was and this desire to be modest in what I wore in order to be active. And I was, blessed to not just, I guess, maintain my Islam while participating in sport, but in all these moments of finding myself as an athlete. I also had really tough moments as a kid through the sport of fencing. Fencing was, the first time, or participating in the sport of fencing was the first time that I realized that my skin color and my faith had the ability to change how people treated me. I didn't know as a kid that people would treat me differently because I was black, or that people would treat me differently because I was Muslim without knowing anything about me. And I remember there were parents of other fencers who would, ask the referees if it was okay for me to compete with my hijab. And not that they were concerned with my safety. It was more like, is my kid gonna be safe competing with her? There were parents who would ask me, are you sure you don't want to play basketball? Because I'm black, right? And I realize now that they were, probably just upset because I was beating their kids, but it was really like, it's interesting how even adults can try to manipulate and affect how children view themselves and how we come to even appreciate ourselves. And it's something that, I will say that it's never been a test for me to question myself and who I am. And I don't know if that comes from, having a strong faith base or even just having strong parents. My parents never put limitations on who I was because I was a girl, right? And I think being an African American, it's a unique set of challenges just existing in this world as a black person. And I feel like I owe a lot to my parents in instilling that strength and fortitude in us, like not just me, but also my siblings, and telling us to believe in ourselves, because if you don't believe in yourself, who's gonna believe in you? I ended up being recruited to fence for Duke University, where I fenced for 3 years. I was there on academic scholarship, but I found that fencing in college was a little bit different than fencing in high school, right? I didn't have the same affinity for my teammates that I had in high school. And I'm like, I wasn't sure if I loved the sport, right? I've always loved the people that I'm around. And I remember at a fencing competition when I was 17, a white woman came to me and she said, "Did you know there are black people who fence in New York City?" And I'm like, that's kind of rude, right? But I went home and I Googled like black people fencing in New York, because I'm like, where are they, right? I want to know. And I was really fortunate to find a nonprofit that was started by a 6-time Olympian by the name of Peter Westbrook. He won a bronze medal at the Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea in 1988. He came from a single-parent household who was raised by his Japanese mom. His dad, who's African-American, was in the service, found his mom, or met his mom overseas, brought her back to the States, and was super abusive, and left his mom to raise these 2 biracial kids in the 60s in Newark, New Jersey, which is a very rough urban city. And this woman who's Japanese, raising these biracial kids in the 60s, wanted to give her son an outlet. She didn't want him to end up on the street. She didn't want him to go to prison. So, like channeling her samurai heritage, she wanted him to start fencing. So she would give him $1 to fence. And I guess he got tired of taking his mom's money, or felt bad because his mom didn't have a ton of money. And he ended up, having a knack for the sport, went to NYU. And again, he's, profound within the sport of fencing, because he's really laid the groundwork for African-American fencers in this sport. But what I love most about Peter is that he took this opportunity that Allah gave him, and he used it to give back. And he started this nonprofit, and now we have about 200 kids every Saturday morning in New York, in the center of New York City, not too far from Penn Station. From the ages of 9 to 18, they come and they learn how to fence. And when I was 17, and I remember going to this nonprofit and seeing for the first time, minorities who were successful in the sport of fencing. When I was in high school, I only thought of using sport to go to a good university. I didn't know that there was fencing in the Olympics. I never thought about the Olympics as a kid. But going to the Peter Westbrook Foundation allowed me the opportunity to really see myself in those shoes, to see myself as an Olympic athlete on a national team, representing Team USA at World Championships. And not that I was thinking about that at 17, but being there and seeing people of color present in those positions or have those opportunities allowed me to unconsciously graph my aspirations as an athlete. And when I graduated from Duke, I was still fencing at the Westbrook Foundation, giving back, teaching kids who were younger than me how to fence. And I remember looking at Team USA and saying to myself, there's not any women of color on the US women's saber team. There'd never been a woman of color at that point. And at that moment in my life, I had no world ranking. I'd never been to a senior competition at all, domestically or internationally. And I kind of had this choice to make. I was a hijabi who graduated from one of the world's top universities, but I graduated in the midst of a recession, and I wore hijab, and I'm black, and I was having a hard time finding a job. I remember when I was applying to all these paralegal positions. So I was studying for the LSAT, I was applying to law schools, and I wanted to work as a paralegal for a year. And I remember having trouble getting interviews, right? And I had like great GPA, I was all-American. I'm like, why can't I get an interview? So I remember taking my last name off my resume, right? So I was Ibtihaj Enas. Enas is my middle name. Now you know all my government information. And I was getting a ton of interviews after that, believe it or not. I was like, shocker, taking Muhammad off, you get interviews. But I'm Muslim, I wear hijab. You can't hide that when you get to the interview, right? So I was still having trouble landing a job. And in that moment of having a hard time finding a job, I started to pursue fencing more seriously. I somehow or another convinced my parents to start sending me to World Cups. And it's very expensive, but I was traveling to World Cups, and I was working at a dollar store. Again, had this like great degree, but I was working at a dollar store to support this fencing habit I had. I had the Peter Westbrook Foundation, this nonprofit that was helping subsidize the cost of these competitions. And alhamdulillah, in 2010, I made my first US national team. I remember when I had my first big result, and it doesn't sound like a big result. I made a top 16 at a World Cup. So that's like top 16 out of everybody in the world, right? And to give you a small view of my parents and the dynamics of my family, I came home after this top 16, and my mom is so cute. She bought me sweet 16 balloons, right? Met me at the airport with like flowers. I remember I took 12. It was like a big deal. And my dad is like, I don't understand. You took 12, like you didn't win, right? And and it's funny because those are my parents, right? My mom, both my parents like are very encouraging of not just myself and my siblings, but my dad has always been, and I don't know if it's because he's a police officer or it's his personality and that's why he was a police officer, but it's interesting because he has always inspired me to see more in myself. And I know that it sounds kind of crazy to have, you know, a dad who, when you brought home an A-, he's like, why didn't you get an A, right? But I think that having that unique balance of always being pushed and never thinking too highly of yourself. Like, if you want a humbling experience, you have to come to my house, right? You would think I could be like, I have an Olympic medal, and they're like, no one cares, right? So I think that having parents who continue to push me and encourage me and to see more in myself than even I had the ability to see has kept me on the right track. And I don't want you to think that qualifying for a US team, it's like you just kind of stay on the team, because alhamdulillah, I've been on the team for 8 years. But it has always been very difficult in these moments to qualify. And I wish that I had this amazing story of once I made the team and, you know, all of my white teammates accepted me, and every year it was just, you know, rainbows and unicorns, and it's not like that at all. It's like a very cutthroat environment where only top 3 in the nation are on the team, and every single year it's like a dogfight to get to the top and be top 3 year after year after year. And there's a lot of infighting that happens, not just among the athletes, but also among the coaching staff, where, you know, your presence, you being there, you're made to feel as if you're not welcome, that you being there, we don't want you here, you know, and that's really hard. It's hard to have to travel like that. It's hard to have to compete like that. And sometimes I really think, I'm like, man, that happened, right? And it's not okay. We as women of color, we as people of color should have the opportunity to pursue whatever we want and not feel as if, you know, because, you know, we're Muslim or because we're African American or because we're women, that, you know, we shouldn't have a seat at the table. And having seen that as an athlete, that's really, I guess, what has inspired me to keep going. I could have easily walked away from sport in any of those years I was on the team, because honestly, it would have been easier to leave than to stay. I had 2 years in my career where I was depressed, right? And I didn't, now I can look back and know that it was depression. I can identify it as that. But at the time, I didn't know. I just knew that my teammates weren't good to me. I was unhappy in the competitions I traveled to. And I really feel like having the awareness of my own self-happiness and having a strong faith base and believing in Allah's journey for me allowed me to have this moment of clarity in 2015 at the start of the Olympic qualifiers. I made the conscious decision to be happy. And I know that that sounds very simplistic and maybe even sounds silly to some people, but being happy helped me qualify for the team. I would travel, you know, to 15 different countries a year by myself without any family. Alhamdulillah, I have a little sister who also fences, and we got to travel the world together and compete for Team USA, but kind of ignoring the rhetoric that was around me. I didn't listen to the coaches who didn't believe in me, who I think they made efforts to, I know you want me to finish, but I need like 5 more minutes. Okay. I made this conscious decision to be happy, and I learned to kind of close out and ignore the haters that were around me, that sometimes even come dressed as friends. And it's something that I feel very, very thankful for. And sometimes I wake up, I have to pinch myself, right? Because I could have easily not been me. And I feel that my story is not unique in a sense that I'm no different from anyone here. I'm just a person who decided to work hard, who decided to believe in themselves, or decided to believe in myself when no one else would. And I think that that's something each of us can do for ourselves. I think a lot of times, even as women, we wait for permission from other people. We look for guidance from people who, have never been to where we're asking to go. You can't ask directions of someone who's never been to where you're trying to get to. We depend on other people for support when really we have to learn how to look for that belief and look for that support within ourselves. And that's something that I want to leave each of you with. I believe that Allah has given each of us something profound, something that we can use to change not just ourselves and our own situations, but use it to change the world. Use it to be a proponent of good. Use it to change our communities. Use it to change our conditions. And that's something that you have to ask yourself. Like, what is that thing that I have that's special? Because we're all special. I'm no different from each of you. I believe that I'm special, but it's something that I had to believe in myself before anyone else could believe in me. So that's something that I want to leave each of you with. I want you to ask yourself, what is it that I have that's special and what makes me unique? What can I do to serve others while I have this time here on earth? How can I change the world? How can I change the condition of my people? How can I change my community? What can I do? Some of us wait around for other people to do it. You could be on this stage. You could be at this event. You could be hosting a session. You could be the person that you're seeking, right? You could be that. You just have to find it within yourself to say, you know what, I don't need permission from anyone else. I don't need anyone else to tell me that I'm great. People look at Muhammad Ali and think that he was cocky. I don't see it as that. As an athlete, I know that he was telling himself he was amazing so that when he got in that ring, he actually believed it, right? It's like a mind game. You have to convince yourself that you are great. Convince yourself that you're beautiful. Convince yourself that you are enough in order to put your best foot forward. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you listening. This is like the most quiet room I've ever spoken in. And from one Muslim to another, thank you for no crying children. I really appreciate this. I love women-only events. I feel like it's a space where you can feel real and you can feel like yourself. And you can feel empowered. I always leave these events feeling full. And I love you all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and thank you for your time.